Here we go. Recording in three, two, and one.
I may not know much about art, but I know what I like. That's an impression since I'm talking about Impressionism.
You're an idiot.
Big
Welcome to episode 238 of Nerdery Murdering.
238, I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Jeffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the good and the bad, and the nerd and the murd. Before we kick it off, I know by the time this episode comes out, they're well past, but I do want to say congratulations to the boys over to Geeks and a Microphone. They recorded their 300th episode yesterday.
Yes, they did.
I was only able to be on for about half the episode. It just as a listener. We weren't on the show. We were listeners, being able to comment. But I was able to be on for about a quarter of the show. I know Zig was on past me. But congratulations to them, 300, big achievement. Very, very, very happy for them. Before the show started, we started talking about the weather because Zig was saying it was cold in DFW. It is not cold here where I live near the equator. And we have dense fog, dense.
Well, I
Like,
mean, you're in a river valley that connects to the
yeah,
ocean, so yeah, that makes sense.
yeah. I mean, you literally cannot see across the street. It's so dense this morning. It was this way yesterday morning too, and it's going to be a warm day. We've got like 80s through Christmas Day. For those of you who realize that we're way in the past here, um, yeah, we've got like 80s through Christmas Day, is as far as
Ouch.
I can see. Yeah. And it's not really, really ouch. I mean, for me, someone who likes to golf every day, that's a great time. That's awesome. Speaking of golf, real quick, I played in a tournament last weekend, and it used to be called the Black and White Cup, and it's now called the Scobie Cup. And I didn't know why until last weekend. They had a tournament down here few few years ago. It wasn't the same tournament, but it was a whole different one. But anyway, within the last few years, and on like, if I remember right, it was either on the ninth hole or the 17th. But anyway, this guy gets up on the tee, has a heart attack, and dies
They
on
named
the
it
tee
after him.
box. Yes, they've named this tournament after him. But man, could you imagine playing in that group and someone just dies in the middle of the tournament?
What do you do?
I wouldn't be able to continue on. That's just too freaky, you know? I mean, poor guy. It's just like wow, wow. But anyway, so yeah, so I played in the Scobie Cup last week and it was fun. I had a
That's
blast.
and no one had a heart attack.
No, no one had a heart attack. No, no,
It's
no,
probably
it was
because it's
just fun.
100 degrees when you guys are usually playing.
Well, yeah, we get used to that. We get used to this heat. It was Chuck and I played yesterday, and it was in the 80s. But
Hi, Chuck.
hey, Chuck, when we first started, we had no wind at all, and it was so humid out. I mean, it was we had a blast playing yesterday, but man, the humidity was just killer. That's why I said it's warm down here right now. Um, I had a couple of things. I saw a Facebook post. Apple TV is going to be, and this may be finally the one thing that makes me get Apple TV. Foundation was almost it. And I keep
Yeah,
seeing clips from Foundation, and I'm like, oh, I
I've seen
think I
some of
need
it.
to
It's
get
pretty
it.
good. Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty good.
Apple TV is now going to do Neuromancer.
What?
Yeah, that may be the kicker for me. That may be the kicker for me. I might have to get it. Well, maybe I can get a trial when it comes out and just do the trial and be done. But for Neuromancer, yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
may just have to do it. But I thought it was funny. The Facebook post I saw said, coming soon, Apple TV's new TV series or short mini, whatever, Neuromancer. And the person on the post said, wow, sure does look like it has kind of cyberpunk vibes. I was like, really?
I
Do you think? Seeing as how, oh,
mean,
I don't know, Neuromancer is pretty much the father of cyberpunk,
yeah. And its
William
mom was
Gibson.
Max Headroom, and there you go.
So it was funny that someone said, yeah, it looks like it had cyberpunk vibes. I'm just like, you think?
This is where they get it there, homie.
Yeah, a little bit. Maybe you need to find out what Neuromancer is before you Put out your comments there. Funny. I finished Strange New Worlds, the new season.
Hmm.
Um, have you watched all of it?
No.
Well, then I don't know that I can say this. I can
Oh,
say it. It doesn't
yeah,
really
I've
spoil it.
seen it all. I've seen it all.
Okay. The
Yeah.
final episode of this most recent season reminded me of the Inner Light from the Next Generation.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
what you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was a beautiful episode. I thought it was a beautiful episode. That whole season was really, 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 really good. But that final episode was great. They did come out and say that Strange New Worlds has been greenlit through season 5,
Yeah.
and then they're going to end it.
Yeah. They're doing
So,
this one in the next one and coming really soon. Well, I mean, in our timeline, it's already out by the time these people are listening to it. We're getting the Academy, Starfleet
are
Academy
we that are
series.
we that close to Academy? I didn't
Yeah. I
know
want
we
to
were
say
that close
like
to it.
January something.
Okay.
Yeah. Like the
Yeah.
first week of Jan, first, second week of January.
Yeah. Hopefully it's good. I really hope it's going to be good.
It looks good.
They've talked about having a Starfleet Academy for a very long time.
Oh my God. Back in the 90s, they were talking about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So hopefully this will be really good. And I hope it's as good as Strange New World, because Strange New World has been so good. And I don't have a problem with it going to 5 seasons and then stopping. I think that's a
Yeah.
good amount for a show as long as you can end it properly. I think that's great. And when I say properly, I just mean that you have an actual final episode, that you're not ending on a cliffhanger. You're ending leaving things hanging. You finalize it.
Yeah.
Several TV shows have done that. Justified was able to do that. Breaking Bad, which I know you don't like, but Breaking Bad was able to do that. Better Call
I watched the
Saul, all
first
those.
and last episode of Breaking Bad and thought they were quite good. It's the other episodes in between.
If you give it a chance, I'm telling you, there's like only one episode I can think of that is really not that good. And I think it's the weakest episode, and most people will say that, and that's the one called Fly. Um,
Is it the second episode?
no, no, Fly
I
is
hated the
in.
second. I watched the second episode. I'm like, I don't like any of these people. I hope they all get arrested or die. But I did watch the first episode and the
Well,
last
and
episode.
you'll get that throughout the series. You're
The-
gonna
the-
you're gonna feel
yeah,
the ups and downs throughout the whole series, especially for and against Walt. You will feel both sides of Walt throughout the entire series. You're gonna have times where you're gonna feel for him, and then you're gonna have times where you're like, yeah, Walt's just gotta die. Um, and then you do have some sympathetic characters. His son is a very sympathetic character. But Walt's wife, you're going to have ups and downs on her. Um, Hank, Hank, you're probably never going to have ups or downs on. It's always up with him. You're always rooting for Hank, kind of. You sometimes root against Hank because you're rooting for Walt at that point, which gets a little weird. Hank's wife she can get really annoying. But when you get into season 3, I think it's season 3 when Gus Fring is introduced. It might be towards the end of season 2. But anyway, by the time you get to Gus Fring, the Gus Fring era of Breaking Bad is phenomenal. That's Giancarlo Esposito.
mhm. Giancarlo
He's
Esposito.
he's amazing in
You
it.
know what? I was rewatching Stir Crazy the other day. He's in it. He's only in it for a few minutes, but
Really?
he's like a 10-year-old. Well, he's not a 10-year-old.
Oh,
He's probably 18 or 19, but he's such a baby. I was like, oh my God, look at there.
huh. I'll have to check that out. Speaking of him, by the way, the last thing I was going to talk about,
Hmm.
um, I just finished The Residence. That's a good show. It's very quirky, it's very campy, it's a murder mystery.
Hmm.
It has, I can't even think of the actress's name right now, but she was in Orange is the New Black as the crazy one. She plays such a great character in The Resident. She's a detective who's having to
Lori
solve a.
Petty?
No, not Lori Petty. Not no, no, no. I guess Lori Petty was crazy. Um, no, shoot. Hold on. I'll have it for you.
Crazy Eyes.
Yes, Crazy Eyes. Yes,
I
yes,
cannot
yes,
say
yes,
her
yes.
name. I know who you're talking about.
I've got
Okay.
it. Is Uzo Aduba is her
Yeah,
name.
Uzo Aduba.
Uzo
Or
Aduba, yes,
Dubo.
her. She plays the lead detective in The Residence.
Oh, I love her.
There's a murder in the White House, and she is like this. She, in the series, she is considered the greatest detective in the world,
Hmm.
and
Well, I've seen stuff for
she's
this.
so quirky and she's so funny in it. Um, I love how she plays off the characters. But Giancarlo Esposito is in it. He plays the chief usher of the White House. He's the guy who coordinates the food, the banquets, the
Yeah.
entertainment, the everything. The engineering, the maids, everything. He coordinates everything. And in episode one, he dies,
Oh no.
but he's in every episode because
Oh, flashbacks?
they have to do flashbacks. Yes, because she's trying to solve the case. Um, and I loved it. Unfortunately, there's not going to be any more of them. I don't know why. I mean, they could do another murder mystery, but there was only one season. But it was really, really good. I
Let me have to
enjoyed it
check that
so
out
much. It
because
was, yeah.
I like both of those people.
I think you would like a lot of people in this. There's a lot of really good characters. I love the actor who plays the FBI agent, Randall Park.
Oh yeah, I love
I
Randall Park.
love him. He just
Oh
he
my God,
plays.
he made a movie with Amy Wong called Always Be My Maybe on
Uh,
Netflix a few years ago. I just rewatched that all the time. I was like, man, it's such a great flick. It's so funny too.
well, and he's great, and he is the so he is the lead FBI agent over the case, and he has to take a second seat to Cordelia Cup, the main character,
Mhm.
Aduba,
Yeah.
and he's so funny because she just makes him look incompetent throughout the whole thing, and she just
He's so good at
dismisses him.
that.
And yes, and he throughout the entire series, she always does something towards him, and he's always got that expression that he gets in so many things where he just goes, he's very classic with that. But watch The Resident. I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. Very, very good. I enjoyed every minute of that. So sorry, I love to give y'all stuff that I'm watching. Hopefully you'll watch it too. But yeah. I don't have anything else. So Zig, where do you if you want to take over on the nerdery side of the house?
Today we're going to talk about painting.
Cool.
Yeah. We're going to talk about Impressionism. I know sometimes I said I like to explore the breadth of nerdery. I mean that shit.
Sure.
Impressionism is a 19th century art movement characterized by visible brushstrokes, open composition, emphasis on accurate depictions of light and its changing qualities, often accentuating the effects in the passage of time. Ordinary subject matter, unusual visual angles, and the inclusion of movement as a crucial element of human perception and experience. Impressionism originates with a group of Paris-based artists whose independent exhibitions brought them to prominence during the 1870s and the 1880s. Now, a little bit of background on some of that. Um, so in the middle of the 19th century, it was a time of rapid industrialization, and there was a lot of social change going on in France. And at the time, they were being ruled by Emperor Napoleon III. He is rebuilding Paris, and he wages the French-Prussian War. Um, and the Académie des Beaux-Arts dominates French art. The Academy was the preserver of traditional French painting standards of content and style. Historical subjects, religious themes, and portraits were valued. Landscapes and still life were not. The Academy preferred carefully finished images that looked realistic when examined closely. Paintings in the style were made up of precise brushstrokes carefully blended to hide the artist's hand in the work. Color was restrained and often toned down further by the application of a thick golden varnish. Right? So at the same time, in the 1840s, page 6, because I've got a list of these things. Excuse me. In the 1840s, they released a whole bunch of new colors. Um, Many vivid synthetic pigments became commercially available. Cobalt blue, viridian, cadmium yellow, and synthetic ultramarine blue. All these were in use by the 1840s. And by the 1860s, right before these guys really got going, cerulean blue was also available. Now, before the release of these paintings, what you would do as an artist is you would go and you would get linseed oil and you would get all these little powders or little things. You would have to grind that shit up, mix it with the linseed oil, and then you would put it either in a glass jar that you could seal or these basically animal bladders, but they were, I'll say commercially available, but you could go down and you could buy them basically finished out like a bladder or a pig's stomach or something. Anyway, they were small, so you could squeeze them out, so you had control over what they did. Well, the people who were producing these paints put them in tubes like toothpaste. They were like, "Oh, this would be much easier if we had them in little tubes." And they were also cheaper, um, which was nice because it kind of put it in the hands of more people. So, what is French Impressionism? I told you what the other stuff was that everybody was going for. They are short, thick strokes of paint quickly capturing the essence of the subject matter rather than its details. The paint is often applied really quickly. Colors are applied side by side with as little mixing as possible, a technique that exploits the principles of simultaneous contrast to make the color appear more vivid to the viewer. Grays and dark tones are produced by mixing complementary colors. So instead of actually buying a black or a gray, they just made it on site on their palette. Um, but pure impressionism avoids the use of black at all. I kind of disagree with that statement, but because there are some Dutch painters that did use black and, well, maybe not black, but like a really dark, dark green that's almost black. Wet paint is placed into wet paint without waiting for successive applications to dry, producing softer edges and intermingling of the colors just a hair. Impressionist paintings do not exploit the transparency of thin paint films, i.e., the varnish that they put on, or glazes, which earlier artists manipulated carefully to produce these effects. The paint is applied to a white or light colored ground. Previous painters often used dark gray or strongly colored grounds. So they're starting with a white canvas. Usually they'll cover it in like a white gesso or something like that so that the colors flow a little better. Sometimes it's just a bare ass canvas. Um, they often they're not going on someone posing in front of them originally. They did it outside. They went outside with all their stuff. And of course they could carry this stuff around because they're in little tubes. They got a little pallet. They just put it in a bag and they could go where they needed to go. Um, and other things that they didn't represent, like they would put blue shadows on snow. Um, because when you get a shadow on a snow, the snow itself is translucent, so it kind of blends in. So the shadow is not as dark as it would be on, say, like a wall. They were really perceptive. Um, so, having said all that, there was a revival because this stuff became immensely popular in the 1980s and sold for millions and millions of dollars. But at the same time, the ideal, the ideas of French Impressionism were really big in the 80s. So there was a dude who went on TV and told people how to paint like a French impressionist, and millions of people did. Bob Ross is a impressionist revivalist from the 1980s. Wet on wet, very quickly. He did landscapes, and they were beautiful. He wasn't outside looking at them, but I have a sneaking suspicion that if he had his druthers, that's what he would have done. Um, Assuming he was in Alaska, because he actually lived in Florida. Um, the thing was that these guys, these men and women, um, they were considered radicals. When they first came out, everybody hated them um, because they violated those rules of the academy.
And that's
Uh,
and that's the part about Impressionism that really blows my mind is that the critics hated the paintings,
Oh
and
God, yeah.
yet today they're considered masterpieces.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the one thing that really, really blows my mind about it because I love I took a course I had to take a course in art history in college
Hmm.
that I thought I was going to hate, and I loved it.
Hmm.
I ended up loving it. My personal favorite, and you could do a whole episode over him, and you wouldn't offend me in the least little bit, is oh good Lord, I had his name and then I just lost it. Tricliffe's um the Tricliffe
Monet.
paintings. Who?
Monet.
No, not Impressionism at all. He did a lot of his paintings about heaven and hell, dark and light.
Oh,
Um, ah, why did I just lost his name? He's my favorite artist.
hmm.
I'll get it.
Okay.
I'll find it. But yeah, that triglyph paintings. I have it. I have his name on top of my head, and it's gonna kill me.
Oh yeah, when you
Um,
can't find the noun you want.
Hieronymus Bosch. Hieronymus
Yeah,
Bosch.
Bosch.
I love Bosch. I absolutely love Bosch. Um, but yeah, that came out of that art history. But I got to learn about, Impressionism as well, and we had to write papers on the various genres of art. And Impressionism is really, really cool.
Yeah.
To me, Impressionism felt more like emotion than accuracy.
Yeah. Well, and what's amazing about the Impressionists, again, they worked fast. They worked wet on wet. It doesn't appear that accurate when you're standing right in front of it. You step back 10 feet, there you go. You can see it. You can
Hmm.
see exactly what they were painting. It amazes me. But fine, intricate details, that's not what they were concerned with. They wanted to paint the picture that they saw, but it wasn't about those clear, precise lines if they were teaching at the academy. The old masters and stuff, the Renoirs and the yes, those things are beautiful and they have their place. But this was about the explosion of color and light. And also you got to remember too, these guys were operating in the invention after the invention, or not the invention, but the wide usage of cameras. You know, there's no reason to have your portrait painted anymore. You know, there really isn't because you can go get your picture taken. Um, so they were trying to do other things with painting. It's like, well, it's there's no reason for us to just try to paint a portrait as accurately as we can because it's never going to be as accurate as that camera. Um,
Well, but you still, even in modern days, that's considered something of an honor. Like every United States president gets a portrait drawn of themselves.
yeah, but I
That's
mean, it's
that's
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 a
an
yeah, that's an
honor.
office of state. I'm talking about
Yes,
everyday
yes,
people are not
correct,
going out and getting their portrait made, but they will
correct.
go get their picture taken.
Yes.
Um, these guys were like, well, that's not, we're really never going to be able to do that. We're not going to get that accuracy of that camera. But what we can do is capture the light because that thing can't do it right. We can capture the emotion because that thing can't do it right. And at the time, they were correct. It's gotten a lot better now. But again, there's some things that a camera just can't capture. Even today, um, the way the light plays on certain colors or the way like the shadow is cast on snow is different when you're looking at it than a picture of it because it doesn't capture the translucency of that snow. It just will not capture that light. What they were trying to do was capture those things and portray them accurately and quickly because that's the whole thing. This painting of the Seine River at 5:05 in the afternoon in the springtime is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And I've got between 5:05 and 5:35, in the springtime. So they would go out there and they slapping that paint on, slapping that paint on, and they'd get it before that time period had expired. it was basically a snapshot of that period and how that looked and how that felt just looking at that sunset in, May on that particular section of the Senate. So it was kind of that idea. Um, and again, as Jeffrey said, they faced hard criticism. Impressionism itself, the style, uh, is derived from a title of Claude Monet's work, Impression, Sunrise, or Soleil Levant, which provoked the critic Louis Leroy to coin the term in a satirical way, the first Impressionist exhibit. Um,
Well, and yeah, I'm glad you brought up Monet. For people who aren't really sure what Impressionism is, I guarantee probably 90% of our audience knows Monet's Water Lilies. It's
oh yeah,
the most iconic painting of this era.
yeah, that and probably Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, who was not
Uh,
as
that's my personal favorite is Starry
yeah,
Night.
yeah, me too. That's the thing. So these guys were all working in Paris, and they actually got well known after a while. Van Gogh was he was Belgian or Dutch
Dut
or Belgian.
Dutchy German.
He's Frenchy German.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's running around Provence, not in Paris, painting this stuff. And he goes to Paris and does a little bit of work here, but mostly he's running around the countryside trying to do the same thing that these guys are doing. He's a little further behind them. He never got recognized in his lifetime. Like he died penniless,
Right.
even though his family had money. Um, but we also had them in different places besides France. Uh, there was an Italian artist known as Macchiaioli, sorry, and Winslow Homer in the United States. Uh, they were experimenting with this, what they called the plein air painting. Um, the poet and critic Stephanie Malamar said of the new style, they represented subjects being composed of a harmony of reflections of ever-changing lights, and it cannot be supposed always to look the same, but palpitates with movement, light, and life. Uh, and again, a lot of people were really hostile at him, but as as the city's being rebuilt, and some of these things are end up being gone forever. These guys were basically the last ones to kind of paint these parts of Paris, which are about to just get built up on. Um, and they also had there were some other contemporaries that started to come over to their way of thinking. Jean-Leon Gérôme, who was a classicist, who eventually started painting in the style as well as Alexander Cabanel, um, trying to kind of pull these things together. There was a realist painting, Gustave Courbet, in the 1850s. He gained a whole bunch of attention for being super hyper realistic. But when he saw this stuff, he kind of incorporated it into his stuff. So his is actually a blending of the two. Um, so you got these four young painters who kind of started this movement in the late 1860s. You got Claude Monet, Pierre Auguste Renoir, Alfred Sisley, and Frederic Bazille. Um, and they met studying under the academic artist Charles Glare. They discovered they shared an interest in painting landscapes and contemporary life rather than the historical or mythological scenes. So they kind of looked at this Englishman named John Constable and noticed how he would do these. And he wasn't very popular, but the English like to buy landscape paintings and hang them on the wall of the rich English like to hang them on the walls of their state. Or if you owned a pub, you'd buy it, you'd put it over the mantelpiece. Because he was going out in the countryside to paint this stuff, they were kind of looking at his because they were getting some of the stuff over there, even in their academy, because it's like, well, yes, no, landscapes aren't important, but you need to know how to paint them in case you need to paint them out a window. So they would study this guy because he was really accurate at the time. Um, because the Impressionism stuff that they're learning is not what they're being taught in school. Um, but they did kind of want to grab that. They were also spending a lot of time in these cafes up on Montmartre. Um, and you get um, these discussions were being led by these older folks who were also getting into painting at the same time, i.e., Edouard Manet, um, who all the younger artists really admired. They were soon joined by Camille Pissarro, Paul Cézanne, and Armand Guillemin.
Thought Manet
Um,
was not officially an impressionist. I mean, he's strongly associated, but I didn't think he was officially an impressionist.
well, he's one of those guys that mixed the two styles,
Okay.
and uh, they kind of ran up on him. And then of course, you get Gauguin later on, who's doing all his stuff from the South Pacific and just mailing it home. So no one ever hung out with Gauguin because he was living in uh, the Marquesas. Um, now, the Salon in Paris, the Great Salon, they would routinely reject about half of the work submitted by Monet and his friends in favor of work by artists faithful to the approved style. Um, the salon jury rejected Mayonnaise The Luncheon on the Grass primarily because it depicted a nude woman with two clothed men at a picnic, while the salon jury routinely accepted nudes at historical and allegorical paintings. Uh, Emperor Napoleon III saw a rejected work of 1863 and decreed that the public be allowed to judge the work themselves at the Salon of the Refused. So they all started going to the Salon of the Refused, and that's where their movement was actually born. People went in there and they were blown away by the color and the composition, and they were kind of amazed because it wasn't all men either. You also had Marie Cassatt, who was incredible. But you had Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, Sicily, Cezanne, Berthe Morisot, Edgar Degas, and several other artists founded the Society Anonymous des Artists, painters, sculptors, gravures, etc., to exhibit their artwork independently, but they also participated in the salon. Eugene Boudin, who, again, as you said, like Manet, was a little bit older, but he was also experimenting with these styles. Um, Johann Jungkind, who was a German, um, was also experimenting with this stuff, and he was working with a photographer, Nadar. Nadar started experimenting with how to use lights with photography because of these guys. And again, you had Louis Leroy, who was making fun of these guys, but again, they're running all over Paris. They're starting to get a bit of a reputation. Uh, Basile, unfortunately, got killed in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. Cezanne, followed later by Renoir, Sicily, and Monet, abstained from the group exhibitions so they could submit their work to other things as well. Guillemani's membership in the group, championed by Pissarro and Cezanne against opposition from Monet and Degas, so he kind of got kicked out. Degas did invite Marie Cassatt to display her work in the 1879 exhibition, but insisted the inclusion of Jean-Francois Raffaelli and Ludovic Lepic, who again aren't, like you said, are they impressionists or are they not? They're still playing with light and color and the quick painting. Again, like some of the Dutch guys, Gustave Caillebotte, Paul Gauguin. Again, he's not hanging out, but he's shipping his stuff back to Paris. Guillemani, Monet, Morisot, Pissarro, Renoir, Sicily, Victor Vignon, Paul Signot, and George Seurat. Uh, George Seurat actually made some money, and so did Monet. Later on in life. Um, but again, the identified techniques. You've got these short, thick strokes. Grays and dark tones are produced by mixing the color. Uh, In painting made in plein air, shadows are boldly painted without the blue of the sky as it is reflected onto the surface, giving a sense of freshness. So they're actually doing some reflections with the sky blue on the grass where they don't do it in the shadow. it's amazing because they really pick up things that the other artists kind of missed or didn't think about. Of course, again, you got the metal tube, so they can throw that stuff in a bag and carry it, as opposed to having to cart it out in a little cart and then mix all that shit up. Because a lot of those paintings, sometimes, yes, they could pre-mix them and put them in the little bladders, but that shit dried out really fast. Those little tubes, you keep the air out of them, keep it squeezed hard up to the point where there's just paint, and screw those caps on. They're not drying out. So the technology did help them with this technique because they could run around wherever they need to go and do it, as opposed to being in a studio where they had to basically fuck with shit. As opposed to, hey, I need two tubes of this blue. I'm just gonna grab two tubes again because it was cheaper. Or, oh my god, I ran out of this blue. I'm gonna have to go over here and mix some up, and that's gonna take me a half hour. While I'm doing that, my other paints are gonna dry out, so I might as well just go ahead and make some other paints. So they spend all day making paint as opposed to painting. That's not what these guys did. They got these tubes again. They're cheaper, they're easier to handle, and they're portable. So they're running around, in and around Paris, painting these pictures of the city that doesn't exist anymore. There's some of Monet's paintings of, hey, he's got a picture of the Seine. Well, after the Seine flooded in like 1901, they put up stone and concrete all along that son of a bitch so it wouldn't flood again. It's really beautiful now because there's like a little walk down and there's a little parks area all along it with these benches. And then, they made holes in the concrete and planted trees, and it's beautiful. But it will never look like the way that those guys painted it because that doesn't exist anymore. Um, Granted, it was to control flooding. I don't blame them. But if you want to see what that looks like, you got to go look at a Monet painting because the other people weren't doing it. Um, they did progress toward a brighter style of painting. Originally, their stuff was kind of dark. Monet and Renoir sometimes painted on canvases prepared with traditional red, brown, or gray grounds before, but by 1870 they were doing a lot of light stuff. Um, and they didn't like that, you know, prepared painting. By 1880 they weren't using them at all. The darker colored stuff. Now, in the modern revivalist movement, um, yes, people went back to using some of those dark colors on the canvas before painting, especially with wet on wet techniques. Uh, Caillebott's Paris Street Rainy Day strikes a modern note by emphasizing the isolation of individuals amid the outsized buildings and spaces of the urban environment. There's also a lot of stuff like this. Um, Other painters, notably such as the 17th century Dutch painters like Jan Steen, had emphasized common subjects, but their method of compositions were a little more traditional. Uh, J.M.W. Turner was an artist of the Romantic era, but he kind of saw this coming. So a couple of these English guys, again, going out painting these landscapes, he played with light like the English guy played with light, or the other English guy played with light. And some of the Dutch guys were painting really dark subjects, but the subject matter was, people out in the fields. And they also wanted to paint day-to-day people. Like, there's a lot of paintings of people lunching at the boat party. Most of the really famous artists are actually sitting in that painting. Jeffrey gave me a copy of it years ago. It hung on the wall for years and years and years. I think I gave it to one of the kids. That is one of my favorite paintings because there's so much color, and everybody's having a good time except for this one girl. She's sitting there drinking. She's kind of the subject of the painting. She's sitting there drinking, and she just looks kind of. I can't tell if she's sad, lonely, or bored. I think it's bored because everybody else is having a great time. Um, but yeah, there's all this crazy stuff going on that they're painting, and it's workaday stuff. Some of them get really famous in their lifetimes and actually make some money. But guys like Van Gogh died penniless. Um, but again, he wasn't part of the main group. He got lumped in with them later, but he was doing the same thing out in Provence.
Wasn't it Van
Um,
Gogh that was part of the Doctor Who episode?
yeah.
Matt Smith? Yeah,
Mhm.
couldn't
But
remember if it
yeah,
was
this
Van Gogh.
you've got all of this stuff going on, and they're playing with light, they're playing with color, and it kind of revolutionized art. And then after that, you get Fauvism and Cubism and post-impressionism, which is this stuff's really pretty. Personally, I kind of like impressionism. I don't think we ever got better after that. There are some really cool stuff I've seen, but I really love this stuff where they play with the light and the colors and the paints and just beautiful. But that's about it for French Impressionism.
Yeah, I love Impressionism. Like I said, Starry Night is my favorite. I have a wine shirt that is Starry Night. Um, I absolutely love Starry Night. Impressionism is so good. They're beautiful. They're beautiful, and you said it perfectly. They focused on everyday moments versus big historical themes, which is what came before them, and it is a beautiful, beautiful style of art. Highly recommended. Zig's mentioned most of them, but if you want to check some really, really prime examples, Monet, Degas, Renoir, Pissarro, Morisot, Cassatt, and Manet, of course, as he
Yeah.
had said, which is kind of loosely.
As far as
Those
the portraiture goes, Marie Cazotte probably the best. She captures people's faces like nobody
Yeah,
else.
yeah, go check it out. If you have a museum in your area, you probably have an art museum. You probably have some impressionists in there,
Oh
or
yeah.
you can look online. I think there is a website out there, and I'm trying to remember what it was, but there is a website out there where you can take virtual tours of major
Yes.
art museums across the world.
Yes.
You can go to the Met. You can go to
You
uh
can go to the Monet Museum in Paris on
yes,
Montmartre.
yes,
What's
you can go to all those.
what's amazing about seeing these things live, if you can get up to them, yes, you need to look at it from 10 feet back. And you need to
Hmm.
get a little closer and look at them. Look at them from the side. If you can look at them from the side, you can see how fucking thick that paint
Yeah,
is. And it will
yeah.
amaze you that they're basically just stacking that stuff up on top of each other while it was all still wet.
I think in the virtual ones you can get pretty up close
Could you
and
get up
look at it because I think you can do a 3D view
and see
of.
how that
I
painting is stacked
think
up on top
it,
of there?
like I said, it's been a long time since I've been to one of those virtual, but you can all over the world. You can go to the famous ones. So check them out.
Yes.
Um, Great stuff. I appreciate you doing that. Art is nerd culture as well.
Yes, it is.
When we talk about paintings, photography, our producer Will is big into photography. Making of music, music itself is of course an art. All this is very much some things are things you can geek out about or nerd out about, and that's what
Hmm.
we talk about on this side of the house. It's not just sci-fi and fantasy and
Yep.
role-playing games. There's so much that you can geek out about in this world, and this is one of those subjects. So
Oh
I
yeah.
appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I was like, I thought about doing this when we first started. I'm like, at some point, I want to do one on like French Impressionism because it's definitely something that people nerd out about.
Well, and I think we should do some others as well
Mhm.
because there's some really good genres out there. We can do what is it, Dada,
Mm.
and of course the pop art and all the things that came about in the 20th century. And I think there's so
Man
much of it.
Ray.
So yeah, absolutely. So please continue on some of those. I think that's great.
Thank you. Yeah, because it's not all about D&D and
No,
and Star Wars, man.
no,
There's a
no.
lot of stuff to geek out about.
Yes, very much so. All right. So with that, then we will step over to the murder side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Cultura Collectiva,
Okay.
Wikipedia, Voice of America, BBC News, Al Jazeera News, ABC News Australia, the Case File Podcast, Cult Education Institute, and Medium. And as you have may guess, this is another cult episode. And this one is the Superior Universal Alignment Cult.
The Superior Universal Alignment Cult.
Yes, or as they're known as the SUA.
Okay, I was going to
Um,
say SUA.
yeah, the SUA. And when you talk about it, rainforests at night, they're never truly silent. But for this, on the outskirts of Altamira, there were moments in the early 1990s when this darkness just kind of felt wrong. The cicadas got quiet, the breeze stilled, the air felt heavy, kind of as if the trees were holding their own breath. And locals would later say those were the moments when the missing boys passed through the forest for the last time. Moments forever imprinted into the land like scars that nobody could see, but everybody could feel. So picture this. A mother standing outside of her small wooden house. She's barefoot in the red dirt. She's calling the same name she has been calling for hours. Her voice cracks, but she keeps calling. The neighbors gather. Someone brings a flashlight. Someone else runs towards the riverbank, and no one wants to say it out loud, but they all have the same cold truth creeping into their bones. This is not the first child to vanish, and lately, children don't come back. In another part of the town, you'll hear an old transistor radio that was playing through static as the local announcer lists this week's police notices. Another boy missing, another family devastated, another search party forming. The announcer's tone is steady, trying to sound calm, but the fear between his words are unmistakable. Everyone hears it, but everyone ignores it. Because in Altamira, fear has become part of the atmosphere. It's something that's breathed in with the humidity and exhaled with resignation. If you step closer, close enough to hear a mother whispering prayers under her breath, you'll notice something else. It wasn't just fear and not just grief. This was a different kind of tension and one that feels almost really kind of supernatural. There were rumors swirling throughout the city. There were rumors about a spiritual movement, a woman with followers who's traveling across South America, a doctrine about cosmic alignment, enlightenment, and the future of humanity, and more disturbingly, rumors about children born after a certain year, children supposedly marked by the universe. These are children who were not seen as blessings, but as obstacles. There were whispers that grew louder each time another boy went missing. Some people say it was organ traffickers, others say it was revenge killings. And while other people speak of a doctor, a very soft-spoken and even respected one whose voice one survivor claimed to recognize. Other people quietly but urgently point towards a group whose teachings proclaim that certain children are spiritually empty, children without purpose, children who must be removed for humanity to evolve. And no one wanted to believe that people could take such notions literally. Not yet. As the community organizes another search party, flashlights bobbing through the brush like ghost butterflies, something else is happening simultaneously behind closed doors, far from the frantic searches and the grieving homes. A group of adults had gathered in dimly lit rooms. Some pray, others take notes. Some listen with rapt attention to recordings of a woman who speaks calmly about the universe, about destiny, and about the role of the chosen few, and about children born after 1981. These people listen, they nod, and they believe, because in Altamira, the line between belief and violence is about to collapse entirely. One more boy vanishes, then another, and then another. And then one night, a group of searchers stumble across a small form in the forest who was alive, trembling, and barely conscious. This was a survivor. His story is very fragmented and terrifying. There were bright lights, multiple voices, the smell of antiseptic, and a calm clinical tone giving quiet instruction, pain, darkness, and escape. He says that a doctor was there. He says more than one person was involved. And when police match his testimony with earlier patterns and earlier injuries and earlier disappearances, they realize what the parents have feared all along. This was not random and this was not accidental. This was organized. There was a cult ideology which had taken root in their homes and at their most vulnerable moments. What started as a cosmic philosophy had twisted into something monstrous. So, welcome to Altamira, and welcome to the Superior Universal Alignment, and welcome to one of the most haunting cult linked crime sprees Brazil has ever seen.
Huh.
So,
Huh.
yeah. So, before we dive into the labyrinth that is Superior Universal Alignment, or again, SUA, You really got to understand why this story is not just another entry into the catalog of cult cases. Most cults manipulate beliefs, some isolate members, and some demand loyalty, some commit fraud, and a few commit violence. But rarely, very rarely, does a belief system twist so catastrophically that it justifies the mutilation of children. Superior Universal Alignment wasn't born in a dense jungle compound or a hidden commune. It wasn't a doomsday bunker or paramilitary group. It didn't require uniforms or shaved heads or chanting. It spread in living rooms, rented meeting halls, and spiritual workshops across South America very quietly and almost politely. Yet the ideology behind its soft-spoken exterior was poisonous. And to really understand this movement, how it metastasized into one of the most disturbing crime sprees Brazil had ever seen, you have to understand its architect, a woman named Valentina de Andrade. Before we get to her, though, let's talk about why this case took root in Altamira. This was not a city that was ready for a fight. Altamira in the late 1980s and early 1990s was a city under strain. It was exploding in size due to major construction projects. There were thousands of new workers who arrived every month. Social services had lagged behind. The schools were overflowed, and crime rose. Families lived on the edge of poverty, and infrastructure couldn't keep up with demand. You had a population that was searching for meaning, guidance, and for a sense of order in a time of upheaval. And that's where belief systems, even harmful ones, can spread like wildfire. And I've talked about that too, is cults rise to power because they prey on the weak. People who are vulnerable and need someone to tell them, A, everything's going to be all right, and B, you're important. That's how cults rise. That's how cults get people. Because when life feels chaotic, people will cling to anything that promises clarity. And that's really the dark magic of extremist ideology. It's the promise of answers which blind followers to the horrors of its conclusions. Um, and so you really kind of come to what is the elevator pitch for the SUA. And this is the pitch that would ultimately destroy lives. They said the universe is shifting, that humanity is spiritually unbalanced, and cosmic harmony must be restored. And certain children, specifically those born after 1981, were born without spiritual purpose. They were empty, soulless, and obstacles. Children who, in the eyes of the doctrine, should not exist.
The well of souls has become empty, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I've heard that shit before.
most rational people would hear something like that and go, "Nope," and walk out of the room.
Yeah, fuck
But
off.
some didn't, and some people, and these were intelligent, educated, emotionally vulnerable people, heard purpose in these words. They heard a mission and they heard belonging. That's what I talk about with cults. It's a sense of belonging and that they matter. That's how cults prey
Yeah,
on
yeah, but
people.
there's also a little bit of I want to keep those damn kids off my lawn too.
Um, maybe I don't know, but I mean, when you come to the psychology of cults, this is exactly it. It's that sense of belonging and that they matter, and that they don't get elsewhere. And it's people who are very emotionally vulnerable. And when you get a leader that reinforces these ideas with confidence, charisma, and the aura of mysticism, followers stop questioning things. They just believe. But belief is really just kind of the first step. The danger really comes out when belief becomes action. When adults convince themselves that harming children was part of a cosmic duty, they weren't acting as criminals in their minds. They saw themselves as spiritual surgeons removing a blockage. That's the power of ideology and the danger of charisma, and that's the foundation of what happened in Altamira.
hmm
This case is very well known for the gruesomeness of its crime, but that's not why it matters today. It matters because it shows how easily people can be led into darkness when someone convinces them they are the light. Um, it matters because the victims were children. The survivors live with scars that never heal, and it matters because the community carried these wounds decades later, and it matters because Valentina would walk free.
What?
Um, as we dive deeper into the story, one thing that you're going to see that's front and center, none of which that follows happened in a vacuum. It happened because there was a doctrine which wormed its way into the lives of ordinary people who desperately wanted to feel extraordinary. That desire, the need for meaning, is powerful, and when weaponized by the wrong leader, it becomes catastrophic.
What
So
year was this going on?
this was in the 80s and 90s.
Late 80s, early 90s, or
Yeah,
mid 80s to early 90s? Okay.
yep, yep. So I've now set the stage for this. So now let's turn to Valentina de Andrade, whose teachings ignited this chaos. And to really understand the SUA, you've got to understand the woman who created it. She, not a myth, not a spiritual persona, not a carefully created image, but she's the person behind the doctrine. Valentina was not born into spiritual authority. She did not descend from mystics or temple keepers. She did not inherit the sacred text or prophetic lineage. She was, in many ways, an ordinary woman who reinvented herself into something extraordinary, or at least convincing enough to gain followers. You see this in a lot of cult leaders.
A little bit of
There's
background too for Brazil at the time, because
mhm,
when you said that, I was like, okay. So Brazil had just come out of a military dictatorship in 1985. They were moving towards a democratization.
mhm,
The 1980s became known as the lost decade due to economic stagnation, falling GDP, and worsening poverty, hyperinflation, a mass crisis with prices soaring daily, leading to instability until the Plano Real in 1994. So between 1985 and 1994,
right,
Brazil's heading on a downward trajectory.
right. And that's what
Okay.
I talked about at the very beginning with the infrastructure, all the people that were coming in, all the workers. It was definitely on the downhill. Very little is known about Valentina's early life, and that privacy was very intentional. What we do know is by the 1980s, Valentina had placed herself firmly within South America's sprawling network of fringe spiritual groups. This at the time was a landscape rich with mysticism and a blending of Catholic tradition, Spiritism, New Age cosmology, and UFO narratives. There were people that were hungry for answers and for meaning and for systems that explained suffering and offered hope beyond the political chaos, that chaos you talked about. Valentina saw the opportunity. She began offering teachings that mixed numerology, spiritualism, cosmic philosophy, and messages she claimed were transmitted from higher beings. She had a calm voice, her demeanor was very confident, and her message was sweeping and esoteric enough to sound profound to people that were searching for purpose. Her core assertion was simple but seductive. She had been chosen to communicate truths from beyond the material world. She started from humble beginnings, small gatherings in homes, workshops in rented halls, printed booklets distributed amongst spiritual seekers, and her movement grew. People listened and people followed, people believed. Let's talk about that for 1 second. Talk about history repeating itself. This is how Adolf Hitler started.
Uh-huh.
Understand that Nazi Germany, by pure definition, was a cult.
Yes.
And this is what Hitler did. Hitler started small in homes, in rented halls, in bars, telling the German people they should be great again because the Germany was reeling from the after effects of World War I and the Depression.
Hyperinflation too. They had
Um,
hyperinflation worse than
yes,
anybody else.
yes, and they were suffering because they were made to feel, because they were told this, that World War I was entirely their fault. And they were oppressed and they were put down. And Adolf Hitler took that and said Germany should be great again, should be a great people, because that's what we as Germans are. So think about that when you think about this. Valentina was doing the exact same kind of thing.
Brazil needs to be great again.
Yes. Her teachings did not originally include anything about children born after 1981. That part came later. And it
Well,
really
and
happened.
in most cases, I'm going to say fascistic, but that's just because I don't have another word for it. They need someone to blame. They
Yeah,
have to have someone. Otherwise their shit doesn't work.
right. And that's what
Yeah.
and that's what happens in the cults. They blame other people for the wrong things that are going on in their lives. They're very vulnerable. Um, Her doctrine would involve from vague spiritualism to something far more rigid and ominous. The early ideology centered on cosmic alliance, which is the idea that humanity was out of sync with universal forces and needed guidance to reach a higher plane. This is very typical New Age fare that's wrapped in otherworldly terminology and cosmic diagrams. Somewhere along the way, though, the philosophy hardened and it became dark. It became exclusionary. Valentina introduced the idea that certain people were spiritually out of harmony and that the universe was correcting itself, that the chosen ones, her followers, had a responsibility to maintain the spiritual order. Then came the shift that changed everything. She proclaimed that children born after 1981 belonged to a spiritually empty generation. They were without purpose, solace, and obstacles. She claimed they were preventing humanity from evolving and that the universe had made a mistake by allowing them to be born. To her followers, this was not a metaphor, it was a doctrine, it was truth, and it was a mission. Her charisma was undeniable. She radiated certainty, and she answered questions with authority. She spoke with a calmness that made even extreme ideas sound reasonable. People drawn to her were not wild-eyed zealots. These were teachers, shopkeepers, nurses, middle-class family, and even respected professionals. They sought spiritual grounding in an uncertain world, and Valentina offered this stability, purpose, and belonging. Her followers believed that they had been chosen for a higher calling and that they were enlightened, that they were special. And once someone believes they're chosen, the rest is really frighteningly easy for a cult leader. By the late 1980s, SUA was holding regular meetings in Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. Printed material circulated, home gatherings multiplied, and followers memorized Valentina's lectures and repeated her cosmic warnings with an urgency that bordered on the evangelical. Valentina herself became elusive. Sometimes she appeared at meetings, sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she claimed she was receiving messages from cosmic entities. Sometimes she warned of upcoming spiritual catastrophes. But no matter what she said, people listened because, again, belief is powerful and uncertain times amplify that power.
And these
When
were
Val
uncertain times.
Absolutely. When Valentina's teaching shifted towards children, the impact was immediate. Families with kids born after 1981 grew nervous. Some left the group and others stayed, rationalizing this doctrine as symbolic. But for many, this idea took root. They felt if the universe had made a mistake, if humanity's future was at risk, if they were the chosen ones, if children were the obstacles, then action, no matter how horrific, could be framed as spiritual duty. Valentina did not perform the crime. She didn't abduct the children. She didn't wield a knife, and she didn't tie ropes or carry victims in the forest. All she did, and I'm using the softest language possible here, was provide an ideology that made the crimes feel justified. She did it at the exact moment when Altamira was vulnerable enough that ideology to mutate into something catastrophic. It really wasn't a matter or if something would happen. It was a matter of when. And when arrived the moment her teachings collided with individuals willing to take them literally. This convergence of desperation, belief, and opportunity is what gave birth to the Altamira child murders. And it's here, right on the threshold between belief and bloodshed, that really this is where this story goes dark. Not that it wasn't already, but it's really when it goes dark. And to understand how SUA transformed from fringe mysticism into a deadly movement, you have to understand the city where everything went wrong. As Zig talked about, Altamira in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it was a pressure cooker of poverty, expansion, and desperation. This was a city gasping for stability while change crushed it from all sides. Altamira was once a very quiet riverside town, but the construction of the Tucuri, Pucurui dam, associated and associated infrastructure turned it into a boomtown overnight. Thousands of people poured in seeking work. The city wasn't ready for this, and it wasn't built for the influx. Families lived in makeshift homes, schools overflowed, and healthcare was strained. Police forces were overwhelmed, and in the chaos, children were often left to navigate the streets alone. The
Wow, you
Brazil,
think it's a tiny town and then it expands overnight. You probably only got three cops,
right.
because it was a small town.
Well, and the Brazilian government called it development, but locals called it survival. This is the exact kind of environment where fringe ideologies thrive, not because people are foolish, but because people are tired and they're afraid. People are searching for anything that gives shape to the uncertainty around them. And in Altamira, uncertainty was everywhere, felt in every crowded classroom, every overpacked bus, every overworked clinic, every unlit alley. And in that atmosphere is where the SUA found oxygen to breathe. The first missing boys did not immediately prompt panic. Kids in poor communities disappear for many reasons: runaways, accidents, kidnappings, drowning, trafficking. Tragedy, sadly, was not rare in the region. But as the weeks stretched into months, a pattern emerged. The boys were between 8 and 14 years old, from impoverished families. They were last seen walking alone. They were taken in daylight, and they vanished within a few specific neighborhoods. Parents were begging police to take the disappearances seriously, and some officers did, but resources were limited, as they talked about. The city's explosive growth meant law enforcement was stretched thin, files piled up, and leads went cold. Rumors spread, and then the first mutilated body was found. The injuries themselves were shocking, just not because of their brutality, but because of their precision. Whoever performed them knew anatomy. They knew how to avoid major arteries, and they knew how to inflict maximum damage with minimum blood loss. This was not random violence, and it wasn't a street killing. This was very calculated. Panic would then sweep through Altamira. Parents stopped letting their children walk anywhere alone. Schools coordinated group walks. Churches opened after hours watch groups. Volunteers patrolled the street. This is when every shadow felt suspicious and every stranger felt dangerous, but yet the disappearances continued. Then miraculously, some of the boys escaped. Their bodies were injured, but their minds were fractured by the trauma. Their memories were very foggy. Their testimonies, however, aligned in very chilling ways. One survivor described bright
They were
artificial light.
emasculated, right? Like literally emasculated. They were emasculated, right? Like
Some
literally
were,
emasculated, right?
some were, yes.
Okay.
Some
I'm
were,
sorry.
yes.
Please continue.
One survivor described bright artificial lights in the middle of the forest, too bright for a lantern or flashlight. Another described two voices, one calm, one giving instructions. Another remembered the smell of something medical, alcohol, disinfectant, latex. Another insisted he felt gloved hands. Um, and these weren't the stories of boys attacked by one individual or one deranged individual. These were stories of a coordinated ritual, one that involved multiple adults and crucially someone with medical knowledge. Rumors had been circulating for months, but now they took shape. Superior universal alignment. People whispered, it's the cult. Those followers, it's because of that woman's teachings. Parents were begging police to consider the spiritual group's involvement. Officers were hesitant and they needed evidence, hard proof, and not just whispers. Then came the breakthrough. A survivor described one of the voices as sounding like a doctor, not just educated, but clinical, professional, calm under pressure. Police compiled a list of medical professionals in the local area with any connection to spiritual groups, and one name rose to the top. Dr. Ferreira, we'll go with that, Ferreira.
Yeah, I don't speak Portuguese either.
As police investigated him, they discovered connections, which were very small at first, then larger. His attendance at spiritual meetings, his ownership in surgical materials. He had notes echoing Valentina's rhetoric, and there were associations with other followers in the region. The real pressure, though, came from the academy. Altamira was boiling at this point. People were terrified. Journalists had descended, and politicians demanded accountability. In the background, SUA continued to hold meetings. But what we have here is a vulnerable city, overwhelmed police, vulnerable children, a charismatic ideology, and a handful of followers willing to take a doctrine literally. This was a match thrown into dry tinder.
Mm-hmm.
As more boys vanished and more bodies were found, Altamira spiraled. Patrols increased and curfews emerged. Residents accused one another. There were lynch mobs that were formed, and suspicion burned through the city like a fever. Police could no longer ignore the obvious. They coordinated raids, interviewed surviving followers, and dug through Valentina's printed teachings. Every step forward led them closer to one horrifying conclusion. Someone in Altamira was interpreting SUA's doctrine as permission, actually no, as responsibility to remove the children born into what group they called the empty generation. Whoever these people were, they were organized, they were methodical, and they believed they were doing the universe's work. This stage was the setting for one of the most disturbing criminal investigations Brazil had ever faced. In the early 1990s, Altamira had shifted from frightened to furious. The disappearances were no longer dismissed as isolated tragedies or symptoms of poverty. The mutilation proved with beyond a doubt that something organized, something purposeful was happening, and the city demanded answers. Investigators from the civil police were under immense pressure. They faced a near impossible task. They had to solve a case that involved multiple victims, fragmented survivor testimony, a sprawling city full of suspects, and a spiritual group that left no fingerprints, no paperwork, and no obvious trail. But Altamira's families demanded answers and deserved answers, and the police knew the investigation could no longer wait. So their first major break came from survivor interviews, the boys whose bodies bore evidence of the same surgical precision seen in the murders. Their memories were foggy, broken into flashes of light, voices in pain, but the details were consistent. Multiple adults were involved, a calm voice that was educated and almost clinical. The attackers worked with purpose rather than a frenzy. This was not impulsive violence, it was ritualistic procedure. As police mapped the survivor accounts, one name surfaced repeatedly, but never spoken directly by the victims and whispered throughout the community the superior universal alignment. Followers of the group had been holding meetings in the region, and some locals had seen them posting flyers. Others recalled that a doctor, respected, soft-spoken, and well-liked, attended some of the gatherings. His name was Dr. Ferreira. At first, investigators hesitated because they were like, a doctor, a community figure? But the more that they pulled at threads, the stronger the connection became. So they brought him in for questioning, and he denied everything. He was very calm, he was very polite, and he insisted he had no involvement in any of the disappearances and that he was the victim of local hysteria, that he only attended the meetings out of curiosity. Investigators, however, noticed his demeanor. They felt he was a little too polished and too rehearsed, and survivors had described a voice just like his. So a search warrant that they issued uncovered surgical tools, personal notes referencing Valentina's teachings, writings echoing the empty children doctrine, and connections to other known SUA members. Now, none of this was proof of a murder, but it was far from innocent. With Ferreira identified, investigators widened their scope. They constructed a list of individuals associated with SUA, people who attended meetings, distributed materials, or followed Valentina's teachings closely, and they discovered small cells of followers in Altamira, members who moved through the region frequently, and spiritual workshops that matched survivor descriptions. Police then carried out multiple arrests. Some suspects cracked immediately, denying involvement but admitting ideological devotion. Others remained silent. One suspect admitted to attending meetings where Valentina's teachings were discussed openly, including the idea that children born after 1981 were spiritually defective. But when asked whether she meant that literally, the followers disagreed. Some insisted it was a metaphor, while others believed it was a cosmic directive. And that's where the problem was. The ideology was vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways, but it was focused enough to justify violence in the minds of true believers.
So at no time she said all these kids born after 1981 are defective. She didn't say these kids born after 1981 are defective. You should go murder them.
Right, she never directly said it. She was very non-committal, I
Uh,
guess is what she was saying. Ferreira did have supporters. There were people who saw him as a compassionate doctor being scapegoated by a failing police force. Some believed the cult accusations were far-fetched, which was a moral panic fueled by fear. But others, especially parents of the missing children, saw him as the most likely suspect. His status meant he had resources, his medical knowledge meant he had skill, and his connection to the SUA meant he had motive. And the more police uncovered, the harder it was to dismiss those links. Interrogations of arrested followers revealed the same chilling pattern. None claimed to have committed murder. None admitted involvement in the mutilations, but all of them referenced Valentina's cosmic warnings. One follower described children as spiritually misaligned. Another called them barriers to the future. Another claimed the universe never intended for them to exist. These were not confessions, but they are motives. The moment came when investigators re-interviewed a survivor who had regained fragments of memory after months of recovery, and he remembered the calm, confident voice telling someone else to hold still and do it quickly. When played recordings of local professionals, he hesitated and then pointed to Ferrera's voice. It wasn't a perfect identification because trauma complicates memory, but it was a powerful lead. So, with mounting pressure, police presented their findings to prosecutors, consistent survivor testimony, forensic evidence showing surgical precision, connection among suspects, Ferrera's alignment with Valentina's doctrine, his presence at multiple SUA meetings, his access to medical tools, and witness statements linking him to followers involved in abduction. Wasn't airtight, but it's enough to make charges. So, when Ferrera was formally arrested, the city erupted. Some cheered, some protested, some prayed, and others fled, fearing they might be next on the suspect list. Ferrera claimed his innocence at every opportunity. He claimed he was targeted because he was a convenient scapegoat, but investigators noticed that for someone supposedly uninvolved, he had a remarkable depth of knowledge about SUA teachings and an uncanny ability to deflect blame onto everyone but himself. But the elephant in the room still loomed large. What about Valentina? Investigators couldn't reach her. She was gone. She was out of the country. She was moving between Argentina and Uruguay, which was out of Brazil's jurisdiction. But her shadow was everywhere. There were writings, there were meetings still, and there was the ideology that justified murder. So this set the stage for the trials. The pressure on investigators was huge. The community demanded justice and the nation wanted answers. But the world was about to watch Brazil unravel one of the most disturbing cult-linked crimes in modern history. By the time the first trial opened in 1996, Brazil had waited nearly a decade for justice. Entire childhoods had passed since the early disappearances, and families still carried the grief like a permanent weight. Survivors had now grown into teenagers, some were still physically scarred, and all were psychologically marked. Journalists swarmed the courthouse and protesters filled the street. And inside Altamira, people hoped not for closure because closure was impossible, but for accountability and justice. So the focus now shifted from the forest and the investigations to those cold fluorescent lights of the courtroom. These trials unfolded like a national drama. Judges, attorneys, police, families, spiritual followers, activists, skeptics, and spectators all packed the courtrooms. Reporters fought for seats, microphones were lined in the hallways, and it just the emotional temperature was huge. At the center of all this stood the defendants. They were men tied not only to the crimes themselves, but to the ideology that encouraged them, and no defendant loomed larger than Dr. Ferreira. Prosecutors laid a case out built on three pillars: medical precision. Experts testified the mutilations were done by someone with advanced anatomical knowledge. They weren't jagged or random, they were controlled, symmetrical, and clean. Survivor testimony. Multiple survivors recalled a calm clinical voice giving instructions during the attacks. The voice was eerily similar to Ferreira's. Ideological alignment. Notes seized from Fierro's home echoed Valentina's teaching about empty children, and his involvement in the SUA meetings established motive. Ferreira's defense argued the evidence was circumstantial. Memories from traumatized survivors were unreliable, that the police wanted a scapegoat, and spiritual attendance didn't mean belief, and belief didn't mean violence. But the survivors' words carried weight, and their trauma was undeniable. Their descriptions were consistent. One survivor broke down when he said he spoke like a doctor, not someone angry, like someone working. Fierro wasn't the only one on trial. Several followers of SUA faced charges ranging from kidnapping to torture to murder. Some were connected through witness statements, others through their attendance at meetings or possession of SUA materials. One defendant admitted attending gatherings where Valentina's doctrines about defective children were discussed. Another owned property near where bodies had been found. Another had hosted meetings in his home. And each defendant denied participating in the violence, and each insisted the ideology was symbolic, but symbolic or not, the bodies were real, you know? Prosecutors presented Valentina's writings verbatim, her declaration about cosmic alignment, about chosen followers, and most chillingly about the mistake the universe had made in allowing certain children to exist. Uh, it, in real life, though, ideology alone is not enough to convict. The court had to have proof of action, not belief. Through the proceedings, one person's name hovered over everything like a specter, and that was Valentina's. The ideological architect, the leader, the one whose words had inspired everything, but Valentina wasn't in the courtroom. As I said earlier, she'd already fled to Brazil, first to Argentina, then Uruguay. She slipped through legal cracks and jurisdictional borders. And eventually, international pressure, though, forced her to return to stand trial. And when she finally entered the courtroom, everything changed. Valentina did not arrive as a fugitive, but as a self-assured spiritual leader. She was calm, composed, and impeccably dressed. She denied all accusations with poise, and she insisted her teachings had been misunderstood. She claimed that soulless children was metaphorical and not literal. So she offered no remorse and no apology and no acknowledgement of influence. To the families, her composure was infuriating. To her followers, it was proof of innocence, and to the court, it became complicated. There was no evidence she physically harmed any child, no recordings of her ordering violence, and no documents linking her directly to the crimes. Motivation is not action. Belief is not conspiracy. The prosecution argued that her ideology made the murders possible. The defense countered that the ideas cannot be criminalized. And under Brazilian law, with no direct proof of involvement, the judge had no choice. Valentina was acquitted. The courtroom erupted when she was acquitted. There were parents who screamed, some fainted, others collapsed crying. To them, the woman who had inspired their children's killers was walking free. Other defendants were not so fortunate. Several followers received lengthy sentences of murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, torture, and conspiracy. Ferreira received one of the harshest sentences, though he continued to proclaim innocence. His appeal stretched on for years. Legal battles raged on, but for many Brazilians, Vieira's conviction symbolized at least some measure of justice. The trials ended, but of course the wounds did not heal. Families were still struggling with PTSD, depression, ruined marriages, community distrust, and unresolved grief. The survivors still carried their lifelong scars and physical, emotional, psychological. Some couldn't sleep without the lights on. Some refused medical treatment for unrelated injuries, and some never fully reintegrated into society. Altamira never returned to normal. And how could it? Years later, when documentaries revisited the case, locals still cried when discussing the murders, and their fears still lingered, and the pain still lingered. The question why still lingered. And Valentina remained free. She was living quietly, continuing to deny everything, insisting she had done nothing more than share spiritual guidance. Academics still debate this case, and journalists still revisit it. Psychologists use it to study cult behavior, and law enforcement cites it as a failure of early intervention. Families are still praying for peace, and those who followed the SUA renounced the group entirely. Others insisted it was innocent, and a few continued to believe the doctrine very quietly out of sight. The trials closed the legal chapter of the case, but legally resolved does not mean emotionally resolved. And justice, really, true justice, remains, elusive. This case is remembered not because of the convictions, but because the person whose ideology sparked everything walked away untouched. That's the wound that never fully closes. When you look back at everything that happened in Altamira, the disappearances, the surgeries, the survivors, the arrests, the trials, the ideology, and the acquittal, you really start to understand why this case still lingers in Brazil's memory like a permanent shadow. The crimes themselves were horrifying, yes, but what makes this case unforgettable is how preventable it was. No one had to die, no child had to suffer, and no parent had to bury their son. All of it, every injury, every disappearance, every scream heard in the forest stemmed from belief, not power, not politics, not money. Belief. Belief is one of the most powerful forces in human history. It inspires great kindness and unspeakable cruelty. It comforts the dying and motivates the
Tulsa
violent.
Doom. Tulsa
Yes,
Doom. Tulsa Doom.
absolutely.
What
Absolutely.
power is steel over this?
Yes. Belief comforts the dying and motivates the violent. It binds communities together and tears family apart. In Altamira, belief became a weapon, not through physical force, but through ideology that rotted from the inside out. SUA didn't require guns or armies or compounds or barricades. It only required a charismatic leader, vulnerable followers, a city in crisis, and a doctrine that dehumanized children. Again, I go back to Adolf Hitler, charismatic leader, vulnerable followers, a country in crisis, and a doctrine that dehumanized a certain race.
Hmm.
Once all those ingredients came together, the
Eerie
rest
similarities.
oh, absolutely. Once it all came together, the rest unfolded with chilling predictability. Someone was going to interpret Valentina's teachings literally.
Hmm.
Someone was going to take action, and someone was going to apply to her ideology like a scalpel. In Altamira, that someone, or more accurately, that group of someone's changed the city forever. And it's really easy when covering cases like this to get lost in the adults, the leaders, the suspects, the doctors, the investigators, the journalists, and the judges. But honestly, the true heart of this story is the children who were targeted because a group of adults convinced themselves they were cosmic mistakes. These boys were sons, students, and friends. They liked soccer and fishing and exploring the forest. They were kids in an unstable world, trying to carve out small pockets of joy. Their innocence was not symbolic. It was metaphysical and it was real and it was stolen. Their families are still feeling this loss decades later. Some of these boys lived through the ideal, but survived is a really complicated word. They grew up with scars. They still have nightmares, distrust of adults, difficulty forming relationships, aversion to medical settings, and chronic fear. Their lives are really split into before and after, and the after is filled with trauma that they never asked for. Altamira itself carries a permanent wound. Older residents still talk about this era with trembling voices. Younger generations grow up hearing stories in folklore, warnings passed down from parents to children. And really, even today, the case sits in a very strange place between crime history, urban legend, and cultural trauma. Everyone knows what happened, but no one understands completely why. There's questions that still remain unanswerable. How many victims were truly involved? How many attackers escaped detection? How much did Valentina really know? Could more have been done earlier? And why did no one intervene before the pattern escalated? These are the questions that still haunt the family, investigators, and researchers alike. Um, so why did I tell this story now? Why did I revisit this trauma and reopen old wounds? Because forgetting is dangerous. For, Here's where I mentioned Hitler multiple times. Forgetting allows patterns to repeat. Forgetting allows leaders like Valentina to rise again. Forgetting lets people believe this could never happen here, but it can anywhere, anytime. It just takes the wrong message in the right
La
person's
olam
ear.
lo. La olam
Yes,
lo, baby. Never again means everybody.
yes.
That
All it,
includes that includes Jews as well. Never again is
well,
for everybody.
all it takes, and I mentioned this several times in this episode, is the wrong message in the right person's ear. This,
Uh-huh.
this story matters not because it's sensational, but because it's cautionary. It reveals how fragile the boundary is between belief and brutality, and it shows how easily vulnerable communities can be swept into chaos by charismatic extremism. It reminds us that children are often the first victim when ideology turns dark. And whatever else this case became, whether media spectacle, courtroom battle, academic study, it began with children and it ends with them. Their names deserve to be remembered. Their stories deserve to be honored. Their suffering deserves acknowledgement. And the world deserves the reminder that ideology, unchecked, is not harmless and can cut as deeply as any sword. Um, so I'm going to close this with the truth that's echoed through Altamira for decades and exactly why I cover cases like this. The only thing more dangerous than what happened is pretending it could not happen again.
Right. Or where you live.
And that's the story of superior universal alignment.
Well, thank you, sir. That was fascinating. I always love it when you do the cults. And I'm sorry, I kind of interrupt you. I'm like, wait.
No, and no, that's absolutely fine. I love covering the cults too. The cults were really my first foray into true crime. I listened to several podcasts about cults. I had actually never run into this one, which is surprising as many as I've heard.
Yeah,
And
it was going on in the late 80s and early 90s. I've never even heard of this.
I hadn't either, and that's why I found this one so fascinating. But I thought it was a great case to cover. So, again, another cult. So very interesting how all of it occurred. This one kind of takes me to the North Fox Island one of all the boys
Hmm.
that were being abducted to the
Yeah.
island, and people weren't doing things sooner. So anyway, that's my story for this week.
Well, thank you, sir. I think it's weird that we did French painters and a cult this week.
That will take us to the end of another recording week. As always, you can find more about us on nerdymurdy.com, our hub, our website for everything about us. You'll find links to the episode, pictures of the episode, and you'll find the link to our YouTube page with Zig so often update.
Yeah, but check this out. There's some short documentaries on Impressionism and some of the painters, and you get to view a lot of the pictures themselves, and they talk about them in depth and get really up close to them.
Outstanding. Appreciate all your work on that.
Thank you, sir.
You can also find the link to our merchandise page, where if you wish to show off your nerdery murdery fandom, please do consider that. That does help us. It's good advertisement for us. I have talked to a few of our listeners who have messaged me saying that they were carrying our cup or they had our shirt, and people stopped them and said, "Hey, what's that?"
What's that?
Please do consider that. If you're a fan of the show, consider purchasing some merchandise. That really helps us. You can also find the link, though, to our Patreon if you wish to become a patron and help us with the costs that are associated with the show. That, along with our merchandise, do help us because it does cost for our uploads, for our storage, for our website, everything that's associated to bring this show to you. We do appreciate each and every one of you.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. Another thing you can do that is completely free though and helps us and helps others find the content that we talk about. Please leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It only takes a few minutes of your time, and you have no idea the help it gets us. It changes us in the rankings on various websites, and it starts moving our name up the list so others can find this. So, please do that as well. Last but not least, as we always say at the end of our episodes now, to our good friend Chuck, you can go to sleep now.
Good night, Chuck.
Good night, Chuck. With that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
and I'm Jeffrey with your murdering.
Cue the music.